Welcome back to another Star Mini Gaming YouTube video. In this video, I'm responding to Vince's topic of the week on named characters and their kind of lack in Age of Sigmar and whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, in my opinion. And just talking about named characters just in general, not limited to the Age of Sigmar. I will give other examples of other games that I've played and the impact that named characters in those games have had in terms of shaping how I feel about that. So the very first tabletop game I ever played was Mechwarrior Dark Age, which I will be posting an image up here. And if you're familiar with HeroClix, it was a similar game to that. I've always loved Mechwarrior. I grew up playing the computer games. And all the different, Mechwarrior 2 and 3 and 4 and 4 Mercenaries and things like that. But, so the tabletop game was a natural first step for me into the world of tabletop gaming. And it was shortly followed by the Lord of the Rings game. This is the original rulebook, whenever the Fellowship of the Ring movie came out. But in both those games, there were quite a few named heroes, named characters. In the Mechwarrior game, you had named characters in every category. In the game, you had infantry, vehicles, and mechs, which are, giant combat robots. And you would have your generics and your uniques. And as the game progressed into what it's, kind of like second edition, it became known as the Age of Destruction, as they introduced more of the classic combat-oriented mechs as the story progressed. Because initially there were more of mechs that were for construction or forestry work, more of a utility mech as opposed to a combat mech that were kind of retrofitted for combat, and a lot less, heavier like assault vehicles and stuff. Like as the game progressed, those were introduced as larger factions came into play, and the combat really escalated into more of a full-out war instead of smaller battles. And the named characters progressed. You initially had named characters of all of them. You had named infantry, you had named vehicles, and you had named mechs. And as Age of Destruction progressed, there began to be more customization options. They introduced cards to the game, like unique pilot cards. They had gear that you could equip your mech with. Some of it was unique, and also that you could customize your mech to a degree to mirror how the computer games worked. And I really enjoyed the way that they went with the unique pilots, because initially, whenever you had a unique character before the customization aspect came into the game, it was just typically a more powerful version of what already existed, right? So if you had the classic Madcat or Timberwolf mech, that's the most iconic one, which will be pictured here. A named one just basically was a little bit better typically than a non-unique, right? But once they introduced the customization mechanic to the game, it was really cool because you could use your unique pilot in any of the mechs that had come out, including generic mechs, but within a certain restrictions. But if you put the unique pilot in their unique mech, you gain an additional benefit, which was a special ability, and you had these other customization cards. And I really enjoyed that because kind of like reading the backstory, because they had novelizations to go along with it, just like 40K and Age of Sigmar do, to where you kind of learned about the character. And so you had like the flavor of from the novels, you had the flavor from the kind of background text on their card, you had the unique special rule and the way that their stats that they added, because they would always add their stats. So like your pilot might add like +2 to your accuracy and +1 to your damage at range or something like that, and that was whatever mech they were put in. So even if they weren't in their special unique mech, you had that kind of flavor to that unique character. And it was really neat, and I really enjoyed that because it helped tie you to that character even more. Like you kind of gained, I guess, a deeper appreciation for the character, and so you had more of an emotional investment. And it really got to the point to where just about everyone who played like would have their favorite kind of commanders that we would run, and all of the tournaments that I would go to, even though the game wasn't super narratively driven, basically narrative stories would evolve based upon how our characters did each week, and that was a lot of fun. And then shortly after that, I began playing the Lord of the Rings game, and in the first edition, the Fellowship of the Ring, for good, for example, there were 3 troop options. Man of Gondor, which is the Númenóreans that we see at the beginning of the movie. A Wood Elf Warrior, unarmored, just as we see in Lothlorien whenever the Fellowship goes there after Gandalf is killed or falls to the Balrog. And the High Elf Warriors that we also see at the beginning of the Fellowship. And then we had Captain of Gondor, Kings of Men, Gwahir, the eagle that rescues Gandalf, Galadriel, Celeborn, Gil-galad, an elven captain, Bilbo, a dwarf king, Elendil, and Isildur, Elrond, Arwen, Haldir, Aragorn, Boromir, Gandalf, Merry, Pippin, Legolas, Gimli, and Frodo and Sam. So, clearly in its first incarnation, the game was very hero-driven, and more than half the heroes were unique heroes. And the big thing for me, and as the game continued to expand and we had additional factions that came into play because they were introduced in the movies, so that even in the current edition where we have the different army books like this for the Fallen Realms, or the Hobbit introduced core rulebook edition, we have lots and lots of named heroes, and especially in a game like Lord of the Rings, it's those named heroes that really make the game interesting, right? Like, if you've watched the movies and you're a big Lord of the Rings fan, or you've read the novels, like, you have your favorite characters, and when you play them on the tabletop, you are emotionally invested in that character. And especially since there are the movies, at least in my opinion, you had kind of a deeper, like, at least for myself, there was kind of like a deeper imagination level there. And what I simply mean is, like, it was easier for me to picture, like, Legolas, like, basically, just gunning down people with his bow because I had seen it in the movie, right? Like, he could just, if he was just taking out orcs every single turn with his bow, then, like, it made sense. And a lot of times you would play, on these, like, fairly iconic boards that you tried to make that, represented Helm's Deep or Osgiliath or something, and so, like, it wasn't hard to kind of, like, immerse yourself in that, especially as you had the films to kind of fall back on, right? To help you visualize what was taking place on the table. And, in the Lord of the Rings game, it's not uncommon. It's not like super common, but it's not terribly uncommon for you to run a all heroes, like all named heroes list that was like the Fellowship or Thorin's Company or something like that. And a lot of the rules for those heroes are designed to kind of buff each other and to benefit. And against a more traditional army, those all-hero armies will normally struggle to win unless it's like a scenario that they can really play to. In kind of just a pitched battle, they'll lose eventually. But, that was, at least for myself, a big appeal of the game because, again, you would end up with, like, your favorite commanders, and you would kind of build the narrative of those commanders. And sure, if you have a generic captain, you can name him, you can customize him a little bit to make him uniquely yours, but for myself, it was never that same level of kind of emotional connection to the character on the table. I played the Haradrim, which are the people that rode the elephants in the Return of the King movie. I played them the longest, and them are the dwarves, but their leader in game doesn't appear in the films, but he appears in the book, and his name is Soladon. And I had him on horseback, and it was this very epic model. And every battle that I won with him, that was kind of like his legend growing, which fit the narrative of his character. He was a very headstrong, egotistical commander who had risen to power, basically through like killing the other warlords and uniting the Haradrim people. And so, it fit his character, and that was something that I really enjoyed in the Lord of the Rings game. And there's a unique goblin hero that appears in the books but not in the film. And for example, that unique character has a lot of, kind of like emotional impact for me in the game, because every single time that he plays in the game and Legolas is on the board, even though Legolas is the superior piece in terms of the stats in the game and should win, every single time that Legolas and him have been on the table together, he's gone and killed Legolas. Like, regardless of how the battles progress, those two always, for some reason, no matter how many troops or other models were in between them, find each other on the battlefield, and he kills Legolas every time. No matter who I'm playing against that's fielding Legolas, that has happened. And, that kind of narrative is part of what, for myself, makes the tabletop games enjoyable, right? And so in Age of Sigmar, that's something that I miss. Like, it's still there to a degree, but it's not always available to you. Now, for my Death faction, I am fortunate in that there are a lot of the older War Scrolls that I still have access to, and are still playable, that do have named characters. And there are some named characters in the game, like Nagash and Archeon and Arcan. And the only thing I don't like about that is I don't really like that the only way you can take a named character for a lot of factions is to take the extremely high level, super powerful characters. And, in the Lord of the Rings game, again, for example, sometimes it was fun to take that kind of like mid-level guy, like an Éomer, or even like Merry or Pippin, like the guys that aren't a super amazing character, and to have them perform well on the battlefield. To me, that was more, emotionally rewarding than taking Aragorn, who is one of the best characters in the game, and just stomping face with him, right? And so, I do appreciate the fact that I still have access to the War Scrolls for characters like Vlad, who it's no secret that he's a favorite of mine, and I enjoy his War Scroll because he's powerful enough, but not so powerful that you can just run him out there like a Nagash type character and kill just about anything. Like, Vlad is strong enough to take care of himself to a degree, but you can't just be like, well, go off by yourself and you'll be fine no matter what comes your way. And I do like the fact that they are somewhat addressing the whole, non-unique characters into unique characters with the Balance of Power book. Actually don't have it here with me, but with the War Scroll battalions, there's 9 in the book, I believe, and I think 7 of them give you unique characters in the sense that, if you bring the War Scroll battalion, and then like they're a commander unit of that battalion. Of course, you don't have to choose that as your commander, but from a narrative perspective, that commander of that battalion gains, some abilities that make him different from any other version or any other time that you filled that model. Like the Lord Castellant becoming Lord Castellant Grimm, who is a favorite of mine of the Stormcast. And this is nice because the Stormcast don't have access to named characters except for the Lord Celestant, who, isn't... we don't have his name, we just have his title. If you read the book that he's in, he just goes by the name of the hammer that he wields, which is Gal Maraz, so he's just called that all book. So it's something that I don't like. I do wish that there were unique rules for Vandus and for Tarsus and for Thostus Bladestorm and for these other characters in Ionis, but there's unfortunately not. I would like to see GW continue to expand on these War Scroll battalions so that we do have those named characters. I do like the fact that we have these restrictions in the sense that the named characters aren't going to be too overwhelmingly powerful, and that you can't just bring them with any kind of ridiculous combination, just them plus anything. It's, them within this formation, then you kind of build on top of that. Like in 40k, for example, it's too easy to often bring Death Star units by kind of like selecting this hero and then this unit and this other unit and kind of combining them all into a squad or having them running next to each other because just because of the nature of the force organization, how you build armies in 40k. And And in the Lord of the Rings game and in the old Mechwarrior games, for example, you know, the heroes weren't quite so overpowered. A lot of times it was actually not advantageous to take a named character. If you did, a lot of times you were kind of overpaying comparatively the points for him compared to generic characters plus more troops. You would get more value out of that. And in Age of Sigmar, especially with there being no official point system, you know, this whole, you know, War Scroll Battalion is kind of a tax on these named heroes, and I like that. But, you know, anyways, that's my thought. I love named characters. I love that you can become emotionally invested in them. I understand that there is a danger of, to help them kind of represent what they are in the novelizations, there is a tendency to make named characters overpowered comparatively, but I honestly think that if that's kept in check to a degree, that's a small price to pay for what they bring to a tabletop game. So until next time, this is James, and